Hello, everyone. As we got a bit more volatility than usual at the start of this week, I thought we'd do a quick market update. Let me just make sure that's all working. Let me just get the risk warning up, because it has been something of a volatile start today. Of course, we had US and European stock markets falling last week. We had the news over the weekend about Brexit, of the Northern Ireland border again, struggling to come to any resolution there ahead of discussions restarting again between the UK and the EU on Wednesday. And it's a busy week in terms of economic data. Tomorrow we've got UK unemployment. Wednesday we've got UK inflation and European inflation data. Wednesday night we've got the Fed minutes, so from the last US central bank meeting, they're released, and then on Thursday we've got UK retail sales. So there's a lot going on. So I thought actually this week, we normally do a market outlook on a Wednesday lunchtime. We'll still do that, but we're also going to do Monday and Friday this week. So we'll do 3 market outlooks, and we'll also do it next week as well, I think, just to test the waters and see how popular they are. So I think that risk warning's been up for long enough. So let me just drag the platform over. Let's talk about the pound. Well, and there is a lot to look at. I mean, gold's moving as well after doing nothing for months. We're actually seeing gold finally getting a move on. So we'll take a look at that as well. But I want to start with the pound US dollar. Let me just bring this up. It's having a strong performance so far. Let me just take this back. Let me just take this back to where we were on Friday. So we saw the recovery continue. The recovery that's been in place for most of this month continued last week. And we saw pound US dollar, this is on Friday, isn't it? 12th of October, in the morning, traded size about 132.60. So it's the highest level it hit since the 3rd week of September. So we had the pound US dollar at 3-week highs, a clear trend in place down here, chugging away from sort of just ahead of 129. So with it ending on Friday around about 130, 150, then the expectation going into this week would have been, well, keep an eye on this trend. Let's see how this performs. Are we going to see the market get propped up again and another bounce targeting 132.60? Also, for fans of the oscillators, down here, you can see on the RSI, bottom right-hand corner, we had, it was oversold. The last time it was oversold was back here, and it did prove to be a turning point. Worked okay there. Well, it's okay. It actually went a bit early there, but it's not been too bad. It's the 10-hour RSI. But then we had this news over the weekend. I think surprise news, or not a surprise that there's been no progress, but we weren't really expecting any news, any Brexit-related news over the weekend. But there still hadn't been any resolution to the Northern Ireland border situation with the Republic of Ireland. So again, it's negative news about Brexit, blah blah blah. We've had enough of that over the last couple of years. So the expectation would have been clearly for pound weakness. So let me just jump forward a little bit. Let's just zoom in here. Here we go. So there's our open. So hopefully you can see that right on the edge of the chart, that blue candle. So that's our open in Asian trades, 10 o'clock. Last night. So we saw the pound gap down to about 130.80. So we saw about a 70-point gap lower. So it's gap below that trend line, knee-jerk reaction to the negative news. But I think what's interesting, here we go, it's what it's done since. So we've pulled right back into Friday's range. So prices have been rejected down there at 130.80. We've seen buyers come back in, and the same as the European session got underway. So I think what's going to be interesting for this week, there is a load of UK data out this week. There's unemployment data tomorrow. There's inflation data on Wednesday. There's retail sales data on Thursday. There's the ongoing Brexit, blah, 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 from Wednesday. I think what's going to be interesting is if we see, you'd expect, a volatile week for the pound this week. I think what's going to be interesting if the market decides to dip back and have a look at those lows. So have a look at that, maybe the 131 area. So I think for me, that's going to be one thing I'm going to be watching this week to see if we do get, a sell-off from where we are now. The market has bounced back a good 90 points since that Asian open at 10 o'clock last night, UK time. If it comes under pressure and we drift back to the low 3100s, do we see the buyers come back in? Because if we're down here, the obvious place to have a stop loss below that, those Asian lows. So I think it's an interesting week, but it's been really strong so far today. Let's see what the rest of the week brings. So for me, that trend line for now is out of the equation, but we do still have higher highs and higher lows going on. But 130.80 is going to be the big level to take a look at. Let's have a look at the euro. Not quite as exciting, the euro, but let's have a quick look on this one. Let's bring that one up. So euro dollar. If we flip this over to a daily chart, so here's euro dollar on the dailies. So last week, something of a bounce back, but not the most exciting move in the world. Here's the move today. Again, we saw a bit of a lower open on Sunday in Asian trades, but the market has bounced back. If we look at the hourlies, I think like the pounds, it's maybe even more of an obvious level than the pound. This was where it finished on Friday, 115.60-ish, gap lower to 115.40, and we've pulled away from this level. So on the euro, 115.30, I think is the really obvious level to look. Maybe a bit overcooked up here, back up towards Friday's high. So maybe we will see under some pressure. Let's see what happens if it drifts back to those low 115 areas. So I think it's been quite an interesting start to the week for FX markets. Let's see what the rest of it brings. Let's take a look. We'll have a look at stock markets in a minute, because clearly, after the massive falls we saw last week, back to levels not seen for the US market since June, July, for the German market, the DAX, back to 20-month lows. So we'll have a look at those in a minute. But let's have a quick look at what we're going to look at, gold. Because the price of gold, finally, I think, given the volatility that we've seen in stock markets, gold is classically viewed as something. I delete this arrow every week and it keeps coming back. It's viewed as something of a safe haven, and we'd had this. We just pick up on this trend and stuff for gold. So if we take it off the highs up here, look something like that. So this had been holding the gold price down since April of this year. So it dropped from 13.50 an ounce to as low as 11.60 in August, and since then it's done nothing. We've seen 11.80 support, 12.10, 12.15 resistance, and the market just cannot get through that. But finally, over the last few days, we're seeing it breaking higher. And at the time of doing this, it's trading at its best levels since July. So we're up to, what's that, 2.5 month highs for the price of gold. And it's interesting. Maybe I wouldn't necessarily want to be a buyer up here, but I think it's interesting that we've broken out of this downtrend finally. We've broken above this big resistance. So I think maybe we're seeing gold wake up. We are seeing some dollar weakness as well. That's definitely helping the price of gold. And the thing to watch, I think, for this week, if we see this one under pressure, do we see the buyers come back in ahead of this old range? So after months of being pretty boring, I think we're seeing the price of gold start to wake up and break out of this downtrend. So we'll come back to this. We'll do this live market outlook again on Wednesday. Let's see where we are on Wednesday. But I think maybe the interesting thing here, if it does sell off, where do the buyers come back in? Is this a valid break? You can see on the, what's this? This is the daily chart we're looking at, isn't it? Daily chart, this is the most overbought it's been since March, because it has been so dull. So not surprising, after this move, we're seeing it maybe a little bit overheated. But let's see what the next few days bring. But breakout on gold, that's a major one. It's the first time we've been above this downtrend in almost 6 months. So we'll come back to it later this week and see if this is actually a valid move. Let's take a look at these stock markets. Let's start off with the S&P. And then we'll look at the DAX, which when I last looked was having a bit of a move. Let's just remind ourselves the moves that we were seeing last week. Let's flip this over to a daily chart. You can see, so this is the last, 12 months, 10 months or so on the S&P 500. And you can see the size of that move last week, massive sell-off. We'd have to go back to February of this year, and we saw even bigger moves on the day than we were getting in February in that big sell-off that we saw after new highs were set during Jan. So we've seen this market, if we plonk a trend line on there, I think we've gone sailing through. If we pick the trend line up, looking something like that, sailing through that trend line. Okay, so we did see some stability. We'll look on the hourly chart in a minute, ahead of 2,700, but just looking a little bit deeper, some of the big levels to pick up on. I think these lows from here, from May, and also pretty close by the lows here from June of this year. So running from 26.75 through to 26.90. So even if it does start pushing below 2,700, we've got big support down here where we would expect, some sort of strength to come back in. Let's flip this over to the hourlies. Actually, maybe even a shorter term chart is better, just to look at the last few days or so. Here we go. So there's the big sell-off. A bit of a spiky move down towards 2,700. That was on Thursday of last week. And then Friday, just pretty sideways. I think going into this afternoon, when the US market opens in a little over an hour and a half, I think the big levels to watch. Let's look at Friday's lows, around about 2730. And then after that, the big levels ahead of 2700. But on the upside, it can't really make much progress through sort of 2790, 2800. So maybe today we'll just see a day of it treading water, ahead of this volatility that we saw at the end of last week. And I think if we started seeing it break up through 2800, it starts to look that maybe we can see some sort of sustainable recovery. But I think if we did see much more strength back up into Friday's highs, and I think that's the immediate level to watch, around about 2780, let's just watch and see how nervous this market is again, because you can see plenty of sort of good rallies towards the end of last week, but they ultimately just people offloading their shares and real nerves in this market. The DAX, the German market, I did do a trade on this morning, but I think what's been interesting here on the DAX, if we flip this over to maybe a 5-minute chart, is that we have seen maybe I think again this morning. So this is this morning. So we did see it gap lower from Friday's close, but we've seen those lows from Friday hold. So the lows from Friday ahead of 11,400. The market traded down to about 11,430 this morning at 7 o'clock, and then a 8:45 again. And again, we have seen these Friday lows hold. So let's just pick up on those, put those in there for the DAX. But on the upside, we are seeing it a little bit nervous ahead of the last high it made on Friday. So it made that high just before US markets shut on Friday, just ahead of 11,600. And then we have the proper Friday highs a bit higher still, 11,630. So for the DAX, we've seen 120, 130 point rally today off the lows, but still looking a bit nervous ahead of these highs. So even though we get these pretty big intraday moves, we're not really cracking any big levels yet. So I think again, it's all going to be about how do US markets perform this afternoon, and do we see any sort of strength starting to come back in and seeing some of these big levels getting broken. So I think plenty to keep an eye on. Someone's asking what time the markets open worldwide. Well, US market official open for the US stock market is 2:30 UK time this afternoon. So that's in about an hour and a half. I think that's when we'll see those US markets open and start trading. But they are 24-hour markets. So they do open on a Sunday night UK time. It's the pre-market trading. But 2:30 this afternoon, that's the official US market open. So we'll see how it's performing then. And one last look, let's take a look at the price of oil, because that had been a big winner recently, and it lost some ground towards the end of last week. Let's just pick up on the daily chart. Here we go. So let's just pick up on that trend maybe from back in June, July of last year. Let's just plonk that on there. So looking, I'll try and look something like that on oil. So the price has come off about $6 off those highs we saw at 77. This is US crude oil, beginning of October. Some stability over the last couple of days ahead of 70. We did have big support at 70, but the really big support, I think, on the daily chart, running from sort of 66 through to 67 for that trend line. So even though the price of oil has been under some pressure, I think the really short-term level to watch, maybe for the rest of this week, these lows that we saw Thursday of last week, around about $70.30. They held again on Friday, and we are seeing the price of oil a little bit higher. So maybe that sell-off in oil is done now, assuming that 70 holds, and we'll see the market start to claw its way higher. So we've got a bit of a quieter day today for economic data, but it all really starts tomorrow with that UK employment data. So maybe something of a quiet afternoon, famous last words. We'll see how US stock markets perform. But then the economic data really starts from Tuesday of this week. So I think the immediate interesting market to watch is that pound US dollar. And hopefully, what I'm hoping for anyway, is maybe something of a sell-off from this sharp bounce that we've seen today from that Asian opening back to the low 3100s, and then some strength coming in and maybe a push back up towards 132.50. And then in a couple of hours time, when US markets start trading properly, let's see exactly what the S&P 500 is going to do. At the moment, it looks like, where are we? We're sort of, near the, definitely bounced back overnight, but lots of hurdles left from Friday's highs. So maybe a quiet afternoon, but picking up tomorrow as that economic data comes out. We'll wrap things up there. We'll do this all again on Wednesday of this week and see where we are. Any questions, drop me an email, david.jones@capital.com. You can follow me on Twitter for updates on big levels and stuff. And I'm at Jones the Markets on Twitter. And to find out more about the company, if you go to Capital.com, you can see all the information on there. But we'll wrap things up there, come back on Wednesday and see where we are with these markets.